Also, already available now for about a week on Netflix is Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro's version of Frankenstein, with a whole bunch of famous people. I'll just list a few of them. You've got Victor, played by Oscar Isaac. You got the monster or the creature, whatever you want to call him, Jacob Elordi. I don't really like Jacob Elordi, but he's pretty good here. I have to give him credit. He's not bad. You got Harlander, played by Christoph Waltz, who is the benefactor. He's the one that provides all the money so Victor can build this giant scientific, laboratory to make Frankenstein. Elizabeth, played by Mia Goth, and the father of Victor is played by Charles Dance. That gives you enough of the main characters to know what's going on. There's more, of course. So, Frankenstein. What do you say about Frankenstein? They've made how many versions of Frankenstein? Well, first of all, just actual basic versions of Frankenstein, there's got to be tons. And then offshoot weirdo versions of Frankenstein, another ton, There's been so many versions of Frankenstein. I mean, even last year or the year before, there was Lisa Frankenstein. I think there's a brand new Bride of Frankenstein happening this coming year, directed by, who was it directed by? Not Maggie Gyllenhaal, is it? Somebody famous. Forget who it is, but that one looks really odd and crazy. This is what you'd expect from a Guillermo del Toro Frankenstein. It's very gothic, it's very opulent, it's very visually lush. It's got a ton of the hallmarks of Guillermo del Toro. It's got the monster that the woman loves. It's got some sort of a dark angel figure. It's got, like I said, gothic scenery, set pieces and sets. And he's been making a version of Frankenstein over and over for a big chunk of his career. I mean, he's got like elements of Frankenstein in lots of his stuff. And by all accounts, he's been obsessed with Frankenstein for a whole bunch of his life. But ultimately, the big question I asked when I was watching this movie is why? Like, I know you love Frankenstein. It's like if you love The Wizard of Oz, you don't have to remake The Wizard of Oz. In fact, usually letting that love infuse your work lets people know it's an influence in something you love, but it's also transforming it into something that's yours, as opposed to just trying to remake that thing you love. Whether it's Dracula, whether it's the most recent Nosferatu, especially when it's something that has already been made really well, when there's like not only a really great movie version of the story, but a classic. I mean, by all accounts, I think most people consider the Universal version of Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein to be classic movies, and I would agree. I don't really love the Hammer ones very much, but there's been a bunch of versions, of course. Frankenstein, was it Shelley's Frankenstein by Branagh back in the 90s? That was pretty terrible. This is, in style and in story, this is probably closest to that version. But either way you look at it, it's a basic story version of Frankenstein. It's not taking Frankenstein and adapting it into something really crazy. It's taking the original story and trying to make the original story, but just through the lens of Guillermo del Toro. So to me, your love or not love of this movie is going to go with how much you love Guillermo. I really like a lot of Guillermo stuff, but lately I've been less and less happy with the stuff he's put out, because I feel like he's getting more and more into Tim Burton land, where he's remaking things that people have already made before. He did, it was Nightmare Alley. At least that was something that no one's really seen, or it's obscure, but to make something huge that everyone's seen before. He did Pinocchio too, but in that case, I enjoyed it quite a bit because it was stop motion. It was a totally different version of Pinocchio than we've seen before in a really interesting way. And he actually adapted it in a really interesting way as well. He fused it with all the stuff that he's obsessed with around Spain and stuff. Whereas here, he just is doing like a pretty straight ahead version of Frankenstein. So what's good here? First of all, you can probably guess I'm not in love with this movie. I think people are pretty happy with this movie overall. For me, I think it's mostly dull. And that's my biggest gripe with it. It's 2.5 hours long, which I'm fine with a 2.5 hour movie, especially Frankenstein is a pretty sprawling, epic story. So it can definitely hold up 2.5 hours. But for me, the opening, everyone's liking the final third of this movie the most. Some people are complaining about the opening. I think the opening is okay. I mean, not the really beginning opening is a bunch of stuff with in like, the North Pole area or whatever, and him with the ship and all this stuff. And basically it's creating the framework for this, for Victor telling the story of how he made the monster and all this stuff to a captain that's in this ship that's basically stuck in the ice. That's the framework. But once the story gets going, I would say the middle third of this movie, I really quite like all the stuff where he's showing his abilities to reanimate corpses to the school and getting basically expelled, and kind of the stuff you've seen in Young Frankenstein. And then all the stuff where he's essentially having to build the monster. That stuff's all really good, I think. There's a ton of good practical work there. It's really cool looking. It's very gory, but in a very like a dissection look. You kind of get the feel of these kind of anatomical models from the 1800s that are just like disassembled people and bodies, and he's using these bodies and he's pushing all these things together and trying to make them work and using electricity and getting artisans to build these giant lightning rods, and all that stuff I really enjoyed. And even the stuff right after that, where the monster's first, there like a giant child and chained in the basement, and how Elizabeth sees it as a tragic monster. And once again, you're starting to set up the basic kind of Del Toro trope of the beautiful woman in love with the monster kind of a thing. That stuff all was working pretty well. It's definitely an overheated performance as Victor by Oscar Isaac, but still even that kind of works because you think of Victor Frankenstein having a very elevated, yelling sort of a performance. You think of Gene Wilder, of course, and of course the original Frankenstein, and just how he's alive, it's alive, all that kind of stuff. So all that worked really well. But when Frankenstein leaves the castle and when he's out in the country and there's the blind man and all that stuff, I thought the movie for me just ground to a halt. The effects looked worse, became much more digital. The point of the story, I know the point of the story of him learning to become he's a human and being caring about the world, and he's more human than the monster, and the real monster is Victor, and all that kind of malarkey is fine, but it's not very interesting. And that whole last half of the movie is just not very vibrant to me. It's just kind of plods along. You know where it's going. And by the end of the movie, they transform the monster into sort of almost a superhero of sorts. And that part didn't really work for me at all. So for me, this is like 2/3, like 1/3, not a very good movie. Another third, okay movie. And then 1/3, pretty darn good movie. So if I'm averaging it all up, I mean, I would probably go 3 stars, like a mild recommend. I think a lot of people are really enjoying it. So I would say definitely give it a try. It looks beautiful sometimes. I think it's way overrated as far as how beautiful it looks, because I think there's a lot of for the current world, it's a pretty low grade digital look stuff going on here. So I'm not super impressed by the visuals other than the kind of stuff we've seen from Del Toro before. And I think we've seen it better before. So this is going to be definitely mid to lower tier Guillermo del Toro for me. Oh, and the last thing I didn't bring up, everyone's comparing it to other movies and other movie versions. To me, the one thing I kept bringing up, and I don't think anyone else shared my vision here, but other than like Young Frankenstein or the original Frankensteins, I kept thinking of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I know that seems weird, but if you watch the parts right after the monster's created in this version by Del Toro, there's this whole sequence in the bed chambers with this canopied bed, and the monster is still just in his wrappings, which are just essentially just shorts. And he's running around, and Victor has a candelabra, and Victor has to tear off his red leather gloves instead of pink rubber gloves in Rocky Horror Picture Show. And the coding of all of the visuals there are so, to me, so reminiscent of Rocky Horror Picture Show. I just don't think it's unintentional. If it is unintentional, I think it's hilarious. But if it is intentional, I give Del Toro credit for that. I kind of wish he would have leaned into it. I think this could have been a camp classic. I think this should have been a camp classic. It should have been He should have really just cranked everything up to 11 on this one and just gone crazy. I think, honestly, I know people don't like Crimson Peak. I think if you want to look at the Gothic, super Gothic masterpieces of Del Toro, I think Crimson Peak, for me, is much more fun than this. But I don't know. I think I'm alone on an island there, but whatever. Okay, 3 stars for Frankenstein.